Hi folks, welcome to another Come Let Us Reason Together. As you can see, I'm traveling today, but I wanted to bring you this week's podcast, and it's an interesting one. It was a talk I recently gave to a homeschool group in Southern California, dealing with the issue of deconstructing Christianity and how many of the leaders and popular music figures within Christendom, say over the last 10, 15 years, several of them have turned away from the faith, saying that they're no longer Christian. They've deconstructed. Now, this is a worrying trend, and a lot of parents, as you can imagine, are very concerned about this. How can we help our kids understand the value and the truth of Christianity? What can we do to answer these folks who are deconverting, and are their objections reasonable? In this podcast, How to Build a Bulletproof Faith in Your Kids, I try to tackle just those topics. I hope you enjoy it, so stay tuned for another Come Let Us Reason Together. Well, good evening, everyone. How are we? Good. Oh, you're so excited. I know. This is your Friday night dream. To be sitting in the youth room sweating. Because that's what we do, right? We tell you not to sweat homeschooling, but no, I'm kidding. My name is Lenny Esposito. I'm happy to be here. Welcome. On behalf of Achieve, the Association of Christian Home Educators of Ventura, who's our gracious host, and Encounter, who's allowing us the kind use of their facilities. And we're going to be talking about a real important topic. I'm glad that you're out, and hopefully we'll be able to spark your interest, encourage you to go forward in some of these issues that are really front and center in our society, as well as pique your interest and possibly raise some questions that we can engage with. So I want to leave some time for Q&A as well in my talk. But first of all, I just wanted to say welcome. And why don't we, before we go too much further, start off with a word of prayer. So, Lord, we thank you that you have blessed us with this day, this opportunity to come and hear from your word, hear from you what you would have us do, how you would have us train up our children as they should go, how you would have us properly help them love you with all of their heart, soul, mind, and strength, Lord. And in so doing, that they would become faithful followers who find those gifts that you have provided for them satisfying and capable of growing your kingdom. So be with us this evening as we go over some very important topics. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. How many of you, by the way, just if you want to know, if you want to follow me, I'm Lenny Esposito. I run an organization called Come Reason Ministries. Come Reason Ministries is an apologetics organization. We've been doing this for some 27 years or so. And we provide answers and reasons for why people believe what they believe and how to engage the culture. So if you want to follow me on social media, you have all of those opportunities. Also, I'd recommend if you go over to our table, we've got some books and things that I've contributed to, but you can also pick up one of those blue cards and put your name and email address down, and I'll make sure that you're added to our email list, and I'm going to send out some free articles and things that you can use. So if you want free stuff, fill out one of those blue cards. That would be a great way to jump in and learn more about what we do. But let me ask you a question. How many of you have been homeschooling for at least over 5 years or so? Okay, most of you. If you've been in this community for a long time, you may have heard the names Rhett and Link. How many of you are familiar with Rhett and Link? They were really big a few years ago. Let me give you an example of Rhett and Link.
like winning your spelling bee. And then the next thing you know, they're taking over the country. I saw one just the other day, his innocent face so kind. He said,
"Hi, my name is Tim. I'm a homeschooler."
and then he rubbed me blind. Beware the homeschoolers. Beware the homeschoolers. Beware the homeschoolers.
The ode to homeschool. Yes. Rhett and Link have actually a huge podcast with a massive following. Good Mythical Morning, which is their primary podcast, has 18.4 million subscribers. Now let me put that in context for you. The top-rated series on television, NCIS, has 9.9 million viewers. And these guys have 18.4 million subscribers. Young Sheldon, the top comedy, is 9.3 million. This is half of their audience. And Rhett's story is one that you probably have heard frequently. He grew up in the church, saved when he was 6 years old. Now, he was deeply involved in his youth group. He joined Cru in college. He went around and evangelized on campus. Matter of fact, he even left his job to become a Cru staff person. And that became his primary motivation, primary income, until he and Link grew together and started growing this podcast. And he said, "I believe Jesus was the Son of God, and that a personal relationship with him was the only way to go to heaven. This belief defined everything for me. This was my worldview. It gave me purpose and meaning. It was a relationship." So what's the problem? Well, doubts began to be sown in college when Rhett would read books by people who held different views from those he had learned growing up. And what happened is Rhett and Link both became what they call ex-evangelicals, or deconstructionists. They started deconstructing their Christian faith. Matter of fact, they both have recently broadcast their deconstruction of faith stories on their second podcast channel, Ear Biscuits. Now, this deconstruction, this leaving of Christianity, is not unique to these two guys. There are many people, many even famous Christians, whom you would probably recognize, that have also left the faith. This is DC Talk's Kevin Max, who has recently come out to say he was an ex-evangelical. And DC Talk in the 80s and 90s was huge. Also, Hawk Nelson's lead singer, John Steingard, has become agnostic in his beliefs. And then Joshua Harris, the famous author of I Kissed Dating Goodbye, that was so prevalent at that point in time, has decided that he's kissed Christianity goodbye. He divorced his wife, who now has also left the faith, and she's coming out with a book on her side of the story, due out any time now, Shannon Harris. But you're starting to see a trend of these young people, and it's starting to become a concern. Now, what's the big deal about all this? Does this matter to me? I mean, these guys are like in their 30s now, right? Well, yeah, but it's a sign of a growing problem. And as parents, as well as teachers, we need to understand what's going on. How do we deal with this? Why are people leaving the faith in greater numbers than ever before? What is it that would take people so prominently understanding of Christianity as we know it, answering all the right questions in the right way, and then all of a sudden, they're not there anymore. You see, one of the things that's happened is it's a different world. When we were at dinner, we were talking with our host, Susan, and she had said, you know, it's frustrating how you think you have doing everything right as a parent. Of course, children are their own individuals, and kids can go any way they want, but you try to put all the pieces together, you try to make the recipe the right way. You know how to make a muffin, you add this and that, and you cook it for 325, what have you, and usually out comes a muffin, but with rearing kids, it's not the same thing. And I said, well, maybe it's the oven that's changed. And if the oven that's changed, if the temperature is different, if the timing is different, if the pressure is different, then maybe our recipe needs to be adjusted as we understand it. And it is a different world for our kids. You see, beliefs are caught for most people as much as they are taught, at least as much as they are taught. First of all, of course, they're caught from parents. Not merely in how you specifically explain certain actions as right and wrong or do's and don'ts, but also as they see you live them out in the culture. They take just as much from your actions when you're driving on the 101 freeway as they do from your actions when you're sitting on the kitchen table. Now that's scary to me, but that's true. They're also caught from professors and teachers. And when you go to university, as most parents hope their children will, the university faculty is nearly uniformly left in their ideology. It's nearly completely secular in its framework. But those aren't the only influences or beliefs on kids. Media plays a significant role in understanding right and wrong, good and evil, what's valuable and what's not. For example, the use of cigarettes in film, something that was ubiquitous in the 50s and 60s, and even to some degree in the 70s. I mean, heck, Lucy and Ricky Ricardo would sell cigarettes on their show. They would do advertisements themselves for the cigarette commercials. That's not only not happening anymore, it's almost considered immoral. If you go to Netflix, they'll put up a warning, this film contains cigarette smoking. Be careful about that. Yet, what else does film contain? What kind of language, what kind of action, what kind of promiscuity happens? Have you noticed this shift in, say, the portrayal of pornography? In the 70s, 80s, and maybe early 90s, porn was sometimes a joke or a byword, something that you would dismiss a side character for doing or disdain a person for. Now, it's the heroes of the show. Oh, look, we got the free porn channel. We're going to sit and watch it all day. And those are supposed to be the good guys that are doing that. You have the whole lovable Lothario guy, right? The Joey Tribbiani, the Barney Stinson character, the man whose basically whole character arc is developed around bedding as many women as he could possibly do. But more than simply cigarettes and film and television, you also have music, songs that, say something just right. Kids look to music, all people look to music, to help them interpret things in the world and say it appropriately, as you see. Right? Somebody will say, I wish my parents could hear these lyrics this way because it's exactly how I feel. In Taylor Swift's video of this year, Lavender Haze, her love interest is a transsexual, a woman who's had surgery and hormones to look like a man. And here's Taylor Swift cooing and cuddling with this individual. Does that send a message? Do you think the Swifties out there are going to interpret that and integrate that into their belief system? Beliefs are also caught from their friends. Nobody wants to be part of the out crowd. You all want to be in their in crowd. So you ask your friends these tough questions. How do I understand sexual issues? How can I understand fashion and music? What should I dress like, right? What should I listen to? Oh, have you listened to this? This is cool. Oh, man, you will still listen to that? That's terrible. Remember the whole disco sucks thing? And so many people just like went, ooh, I can't be associated with that anymore. Imagine kids today who are dealing with moral issues, with friends who are, quote unquote, socially aware. You don't want to be a bigot. You don't want to be a hater. So kids stop themselves from saying things because they say, will I be ridiculed? Will I be shunned if I even say this? If I bring up my Christianity, or if I bring up this objection in class, will it cost me points in the eyes of my peers? Now, sometimes people have certain beliefs because it has a consequence. Don't like the consequences of a belief. Well, matter of fact, one of the more famous philosophers that are around today, Thomas Nagel, has a real difficult issue. He had written that he knows that modern neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory can't explain things like consciousness, can't explain things like the mind. And he says, some of my best friends, some of the smartest people I know are Christians. They believe in God. But I know that if I were to believe in God, I would be accountable to him. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to be accountable. I don't want to have to answer for my actions to God. And then, of course, lastly, some people want to change their beliefs just because they want to deny the fact that they fail, that they sin sometimes. Well, if I just convince myself that that's not sin, then I can continue to do so, you see. All of these factors are in play and helping to shape every individual. It's especially problematic, or it's especially powerful in the teenage and early adult years. And we see that because of the big role that culture plays in our society, and that's reflected through much of social media. Online is a huge influence, right? I mean, look at what happens when kids get on Instagram. They're always inherently comparing. How many likes did I get? What is she doing? What does their room look like? I tell you, everybody wants to be what I call Pinterest perfect. You know Pinterest perfect? You've seen those, right? Where you have the picture of the Bible is here and the cup of coffee is here, and you have the notepad and you have the pen crossed just this way, and usually the caption reads something like, morning devotions, isn't God great? Hashtag blessed, right? And what you don't see is outside of that frame, the baby's spit up over here, the dog has torn up the laundry, the bed's unmade. You know, you don't see any of that because the picture cuts out all of that stuff. Now, our kids are media wise. They know that that's a setup because everybody's done it, right? People are more savvy about technology today than they ever were. Oh, man, could you believe that green screen? Man, that was terrible. I've seen so much better CGI on, you know. But at the same time, while they're the most media wise, they're still using those frames as their point of reference. She's so perfect. She has all of her stuff together. I can't believe how well she dresses. My life's a mess. Because real life, you're always looking outside the frame. You're always looking beyond Pinterest perfect. But our kids don't realize that they're doing that. They don't realize that what they're looking at isn't real, and it's not a proper basis of comparison. But social media has become the go-to for interpreting the world. If somebody has a question on anything, what do? Let me go to YouTube. Let me find out what the answer is. Let me Google it. This is one of the problems of our society. Our instant access to information has actually made us less intelligent. Because information without context is not knowledge. It's just noise. A baby crying, there's a noise. What should you do as the baby's mother? Should you be concerned? What do you think? Should you be concerned for a baby's crying? What if that baby was just born? You should be concerned if it's not crying. Crying's a good thing. When the baby's just born and you hear nothing for 30 seconds, that first cry is a relief. See, the noise without the context can lead you to wrong conclusions. But that's what we do when we Google an answer and think that it's the right answer. And then those nasty little algorithms kick in, and it says, well, if you like that one, I'm going to give you something that takes that and multiplies it by 10, and I'm going to give it to you some more. Never, I'm going to give you the counter argument. That's not how algorithms work. It's you like that, you're going to click on that, then you're going to click on this, then you're going to click on that, and all of a sudden you get a feedback loop where everything's self-referential. Social justice warriors, for example, the people who make the most noise about the problems in our society, the injustice that's happening to certain groups and things like that, are a very, very small minority of the vast population of the internet. But they tend to post all the time, and they're the ones everyone pays attention to because they seem to have all of the cash, all of the value. So online is huge in shaping kids. Also, media has degenerated. Well, I am behind. We have an agenda-driven entertainment industry. For example, the LGBT lobby mandates that homosexuals must be present, and portrayed positively in all television shows and films, and featured prominently at some point. The homosexual character will never be the recurring butt of a joke, ever. That will either be the father or the Christian, usually. There's never an alternative voice presented. I mean, remember the old movies? Remember Bing Crosby, Bells of St. Mary? When was the last film that you saw where the priest was the hero? It's been a long time. Those are all black and white. I mean, it's been a long time. And again, in all of this, sometimes things aren't clear. Remember this? This meme took off for quite a while, the dress. Is that blue and black or white and gold? How many of you see white and gold? And how many of you see blue and black? So there's some of each, and usually people say, how in the world can you see white and gold when it's blue and black? And the other person said, are you kidding? It's white and gold. Just look at it. And there were fights, and people just couldn't understand how the other side could see things the other way. Neither one is malicious, but sometimes in our society, where we are dealing with difficult issues in difficult times, things are unclear. And if you're a kid trying to make sense of it all, and hearing all these voices online, what are you going to do? Who are you going to go with? So tough questions are important. And it's important that we don't shield our kids from them, but we engage them. Because teens today face issues that I would have never thought about. I was recently asked a couple of years ago to present a Q&A session before a group of high school and junior hires. And what they did was they asked their student body, they asked the kids attending the youth group at the church to submit their questions ahead of time so they would have them all written down. And they did so. Now I want you to think about, what was your biggest worry in, say, 8th grade? Does she like me? Do you think I can, ask her to dance? Or, gee, is my hair sticking up at the end? Or what about that homework assignment, right? I mean, those were our worries. Here's the questions I got. How can we know the Bible is trustworthy? Did God establish morals? I have friends who are gay or bisexual. How can I show them the love of God but also be honest about my beliefs? What are some ways I can use my faith to encourage my friend who has suicidal thoughts? Why does God allow bad things to happen? Would a good God really send people to hell? And hey, what's the problem with gender neutrality? These are junior hires asking this stuff. This is not easy. This is something we'd better be prepared for. How are they supposed to make sense of these if we don't ourselves have the capacity to answer them and even understand why the other side holds opposing views that they do? And ultimately, no one is immune. The stats we've seen are clear. By most estimates, 70 to 80% of young people who are raised in the church, comes from a Lifeway study, will leave it within 5 years of going to college. Now, some will return in their 30s, but not all will. Rhett and Link homeschooled their kids since they were young, and the homeschooling community loves them. Again, they were on staff with Campus Crusade. They would debate the evolutionists, but they left the faith. Marty Sampson, who was a ghostwriter for various popular Christian authors, came out as homosexual. So this is a trend that's growing. And a new national survey from the American Enterprise Institute of more than 2,500 Americans found a few reasons why millennials may not even return. Oh, I should give you all these. Okay. Here's what the American Enterprise Institute found. For one thing, many millennials had never had strong ties to religion to begin with. They had strong ties to the social fabric of their group, but not necessarily the faith that was supposed to be empowering the youth group. Pizza parties and movie nights are all fine and well, but that doesn't teach you about the vicarious atoning work of Jesus on the cross. So if you've never had strong ties to religion, you're less likely to develop habits or associations that make it easier to return to your religious community. Young adults are also increasingly likely to have a spouse who is non-religious, which helps enforce a secular worldview. And then, of course, changing views about relationship, and this is important, between morality and religion also appear to have convinced many young parents that religious institutions are simply irrelevant or unnecessary for their children. So they see religion as preaching this kind of authoritarianism in regards to certain moral precepts, sexual norms. Why do you have to be so bigoted? Why do you have to be so closed-minded? Shouldn't we just love everybody? And because they only hear it as an authoritarian thing, because the Bible says so, that's good enough. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Gee, couldn't the Muslims say the same thing? The Quran says it, I believe it, that settles it? I guess. If there's nothing deeper than that, then why should our kids return to the fold? Both pastors and parents are not equipped to deal with this new epidemic. Paul said something, though. If you look at Colossians chapter 2, he instructs us to say, "Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ." Now notice Paul doesn't say, don't listen to any philosophy. He says, don't be taken captive by empty deceit, by a philosophy that's false, which means that you got to be able to compare and know what's true philosophy and false philosophy. Philosophy only means, philo is love, right? Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. And Sophie, wisdom. Love of wisdom. Who wouldn't love wisdom? But we need to love true wisdom, not false wisdom, according to the elemental spirits of the world. So what are we to do? I've kind of laid out a dire situation here, haven't I? This was supposed to be a cheery no, it wasn't quite billed as a cheery talk. But I don't want to leave it that down. I don't want to scare you guys too much. Because guess what? When all the stuff is scraped away, when it comes down to the real facts of the matter, how you live your life, and what the results are of, say, a Christian understanding of the world versus a non-Christian understanding, Christianity is actually very compelling. And that's what we want to do. We want to make Christianity compelling. And we want to do this by focusing our message to ourselves and our children in certain ways. First of all, the world doesn't make sense without Christianity. That's the first thing. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We take these truths to be self-evident, Thomas Jefferson writes. Matter of fact, that statement in the Declaration of Independence has caused a tidal shift in the way most nations, at least Western nations, understand their treatment of people. The International Council of Human Rights, for example. But where do you get this idea that all people are created equal? How does that figure in? Have you ever thought about that? Because most cultures across most of history have never believed that. They believed that might makes right. If you read the boasts of Sennacherib, the Assyrian king who conquers the northern kingdom, he says, my God's better than Israel's God because I won. You have the Greek and the barbarian. You have the Roman and the Vandals, the Visigoths. You have the believer and the infidel, the Jew and the Gentiles. There's us, and then there's everybody else. That's how most societies have placed themselves. The Aztec nation, it's not merely old world. The Aztec nation, when they conquered their enemies, they said, this is great, because now we have more sacrifices for our rain god. Up to 80,000 people were sacrificed over a 1-century period. Think about that, 80,000 people sacrificed alive, living hearts cut out, to appease the Aztec rain god over a 100-year period, before the conquistadors showed on their door. That's shuddering. But that's what humanity is without Christianity. Christianity flips the script. There is no slave or free. There is no Jew or Gentile. There is no Greek, male or female, right? It's Christianity that says all men are created equal. Why? Because we all bear God's image. We all hold the Imago Dei. It doesn't matter if you're a quadriplegic laying in a bed, or even someone who's suffering in a coma. There's still God's image in you, and that makes you inherently worthwhile and equally valuable as any other human being. Whether you have the faculties to express it openly, or whether you are a baby in a womb. But our worldview assumes these things, yet without Christianity, they make no sense. It's like watching a 3D movie with glasses, right? Remember the old paper glasses, the red and blue glasses you used to get to watch 3D movies? Then they switched it now. They got the clear glasses that look better. But imagine if you tried to watch one of the new movies with the old glasses. Not only wouldn't it work, the image is all distorted. It doesn't make sense. That's what's happening today. We're trying to put on a worldview, a modern worldview, and still trying to make the world that we grew up in make sense. How do kids view today's technology? Is it something we can live without? Can you go on a phone fast for 30 days? Imagine no internet for Lent. How do you think the average teenager would take that? It'd be withdrawals, right? I mean, they'd start shaking. It wouldn't even take day 2. No screens for 40 days. Oh my gosh, no, that can't happen. I mean, we can't book a flight without the internet. We can't buy half the things that we need in our house without Amazon. How can our kids imagine a world without their phones? And if they're that much more tied to their phones, then isn't it logical to say that they're that much more tied to those instant answers that the phones produce? What if kids viewed Christianity the same way they viewed their phones? Oh, I can't survive the night without it, because I know that Jesus empowers my every aspect. If I take away Jesus, I take away understanding that you are more important than me. I take away how I understand myself. Dallas Willard writes this. He says, the early message was, accordingly, not experienced as something its hearers, he's talking about the early message of Christians. The early message was accordingly not experienced as something its hearers had to believe or do because otherwise something bad, something with no connection with real life would happen to them. It's not fire insurance. He said, the people initially impacted by the message of the gospel generally concluded that they would be fools to disregard it. That was the basis of their conversion. Of course Christianity is true. It's like saying the earth is round. You now want me to believe it's flat? You now want me to believe I can live on no money? You want me to believe that oxygen is something that's a perk? I can't hold to those views, nor would I hold to the idea of life without Christianity. We need to make Christianity compelling. We need to show how Christianity makes the world better, and that without it, everything else falls apart. The whole idea of the hospital, as an example, is a Christian concept, grew out of Christianity. Modern educational systems, the university, came out of Christianity. Christianity was a religion that said, hey, if you're going to learn about our faith, you need to be able to read the Gospels. You need to be able to read the New Testament. So everywhere the missionaries went, they would do a couple of things. First of all, they would try to translate the Bible into the language of whatever people they were sent to mission, to evangelize. And then they would teach them all how to read. And all of a sudden you had a very literate society. And a sociologist by the name of Robert Woodbury has proven that in African nations, where some were evangelized by missionaries and some were taken over by Muslims and things like that, if you wanted a thriving 20th century democracy in those African nations, you needed to send a 19th century Protestant Christian missionary there. Because it's those nations that thrived. The other ones became bastions of dictatorship. Make Christianity compelling. Show them how it really does make the world better. And believers must carry their Christianity with them. This picture is a pocket New Testament Bible that was issued in the First World War. Now, many were carried by soldiers on active service, little pocket Bibles, especially during wartime. They were usually given by private individuals or national figures. Sometimes religious organizations like the various Bible societies would pass them out to groups, or the Gideons, things like that. This was to help them find comfort during times of war, during times of active service. This one belonged to Private Frederick Peel. His service number is 3529/241283, if you're so desired. He's from Ireby, Cumbria in the UK. It's notable because it still has a German machine gun bullet embedded into it. You see, Private Peel enlisted in the Army in 1916, First World War, joined the 5th Battalion of the Border Regiment. He served on the Western Front in 1917 and 1918, always carrying his Bible. Now, he had it in his uniform pocket when he was hit by the machine gun bullet, which can be seen in the bottom of the Bible itself, just marking the back cover. It very likely saved Fred's life and prevented serious injury. We need to carry our Christianity with us because we never know when those shots against the faith are going to come out. We never know when the television program is going to make an aside that would get someone thinking, or the newest album release will somehow undercut our Christian values. What we need to do is filter everything through our Christian understanding and talk to our kids about that. You see, kids today, matter of fact, a lot of people today, hold to, and this is a finding from Christian Smith and others out of Fuller, they hold to a view of God which most people call moral therapeutic deism. Now, what's moral therapeutic deism? Moral therapeutic deism is an idea that there's a God out there somewhere, deist God. He doesn't really mess around with us a whole lot. I know that God is out there. And he wants us to be good, and as long as I live a relatively good life, I'm okay with the big man. Unless I'm in trouble. Then when I'm in trouble, I pray, God, you got to get me out of this. God, where are you? I don't like my situation. I don't like my circumstance. I'm in danger. I can't pass the test. I'm failing at work. I'm going to get fired. I can't wreck the car. God, help me. I don't want to be sick or what have you. That's the therapeutic part. So we hold to this idea of as long as I'm moral, I kind of keep the 10 Commandments. I'm more good than bad. Yeah, there's a God out there. We're cool. Unless I'm in trouble, and then he has to help me. But we have to dissuade you of that. That's not who God is. That's a fantasy. That's a genie. That's Santa Claus. Just give me the good stuff. Don't make me responsible for anything. Right? If it's a real individual, if it's a real relationship you're talking about, any authority figure, you may respect your boss, but there may be aspects that he tells you to do that you disagree with. You do them because he's your boss. It also follows that if God is God, he may know more than you. And if you say, well, why can't we just allow X? Well, maybe if he's truly God and you truly believe in him, maybe you need to obey him And I'm going to get to the reasoning underneath this in a minute. But you can't cross off the idea that I don't believe in God because I don't like these ideas. Well, then it's no longer God. It's you who you're reflecting. The modern scientific enterprise is firmly rooted in the Judeo-Christian worldview. It is the foundation. Christians provided the foundation for understanding and approaching the scientific paradigms that we see today, the whole idea of the scientific method. And we need to be active in applying our theology to all of our lives, to why we pay the bills, to why we go to work, to why we treat the neighbors better than we should, or what have you. Our theology is the thing that should be informing us, and we need to express that openly to our kids so they can see that root go through. Unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they try to quarantine their kids from the issues of the world instead of inoculating them. Quarantine, as anybody who's lived since 2020 knows, is something that causes you to lose freedom. You're locked away, you're isolated, right? The whole COVID quarantine idea separates you from loved ones, separates you from other people, keeps you in a bubble. But not only does it separate you, it also causes you to become less effective. One of the outcroppings of the quarantine, of course, we're seeing the ramifications of that. Education dropped. Because social interaction dropped, depression shot through the roof. And even there was a massive flu rebound because people hadn't been with each other in order to gain a resistance to the regular flu viruses that were going around. Inoculation means that you can live in the world but not be infected by the thing. So here I'm going to close with 3 ways to inoculate your kids against the virus of false worldviews. 3 ways I'm going to give you. Number 1, teach them to own their faith. And the first way you do that is you read the Bible with them. Consistent Bible reading teaches you about God. And you think about it, how does this actually apply to me? How does this work in my life? Have them make their devotions their own. What is it about your life that you need to bring to God? And by the way, don't forget, a quarter of the Psalms are guys like David saying, God, have you forgotten me? God, I'm here. God, I'm hurting. I've often wondered why our worship teams don't play the blues more often, because it seems like the worship psalter of Israel was filled with people saying, why do the rich succeed and the poor suffer? Those questions are biblical. They're being asked. And you can say, bring your doubts, bring your concerns, bring your fears to God. He's got big enough shoulders. He can handle it. Secondly, admit that Christians get things wrong. Even some of the best Christians. The one trait that runs through most all the deconstruction stories I hear is that those people who are deconstructing their faith tend to take an all or nothing approach. If I can't believe in a 6-day creation, and I can't believe that a God of love would ban homosexual marriage, then I got to give up on Christianity. Then it's not true. Wait a minute, time out. Let's start with the basics. Was there a real individual named Jesus of Nazareth who walked the earth? Did that person live? Was he as real as, say, George Washington? Was he as historically grounded as Abraham Lincoln? And if that's true, did he really die by the hands of the Romans? Did he really rise again? Is his grave really empty today? By the way, I've been there, and it is. Now, maybe some of these other issues we have questions about, but it shouldn't be an all or nothing approach. And it's very important that even if our leaders in the church fail, if a pastor is disgraced because of a moral failing, if a ministry that has a high visibility falters, if a guy like Joshua Harris, who so many people thought provided the answer to the hookup culture, turns his back, that doesn't say much about Christianity, but it does say much about them. Jesus is our model. When did Jesus falter? When did Jesus fail? See, you never critique a faith by its abuse. And just because someone who was prominent in Christianity sins, that's an abuse of the faith. That's not what the faith itself teaches. You never critique a faith by its abuse. And if we can get these messages across, maybe our kids will start asking questions instead of this all or nothing abandonment. It also requires us to teach the opposition, challenge their beliefs. I remember my friend Sean McDowell tells the story about when he comes home to his father. Now, Josh McDowell, of course, was a famous apologist, wrote the book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, sold out like crazy, was speaking all over the world. And Sean, as a young college student, says, I'm not sure I believe in this Christianity stuff, Dad. And his father said, well, that's good. I'm glad you're thinking about it. Just do me a favor. Be fair. Make sure you check out both sides of the argument. Don't just go down the doubters rabbit trail, because there's a whole other side that talks about that. That answers them. You can challenge your kids' beliefs. Why do you believe that? I believe same-sex marriage should be appropriate. Why do you believe that? Can you tell me what marriage is? Why do we even have the institution? Well, it's so that two people can love each other and not be alone. Okay, how about this scenario, which is a real life scenario? You have two women who are sisters. Neither one of them met the man of their dreams. They're in their 70s now. They had purchased a house together. They had spent their lives together. Now in retirement years, they try to take care of one another. Should they be considered married? You see, they have all these legal entanglements, and if there's the necessity of one dying, the other one doesn't necessarily get the house. It all depends on, right? Unlike marriage, one won't get the Social Security of the other. There's all this stuff that marriage does that these sisters won't get, but should they be considered married? They rely on one another for their emotional support, but they're sisters. Maybe marriage is something other than that. Maybe one of the primary reasons marriage exists is to protect children, because the only institution that has ever existed to create children is the union of a man and a woman. There is no other human institution, either God-made or man-made, that can rear children but their biological parents. That's the only institution that exists to create and cultivate children appropriately. Everything else is second best. And if that's true, then marriage is very specific to the biology. Why do you believe that? What brought you to that conclusion? Those kinds of questions. Watch popular media. Sit down with your kids and ask them questions about it. Don't be afraid to stop the sitcom and say, what do you think about that? What do you think about this episode where Mr. Tribbiani finds himself in an apartment that he recognizes, even though the girl seems foreign to him? And then he realizes that he'd been in that apartment before because the girl's roommate was the one that he hooked up with previously. If either one of those ladies were your sister, how would you view that individual now? Would you want to come after him? Who do you think you are using girls like that? Like some car rental that's just driven around a little bit and thrown away. Don't ban Taylor Swift, talk about it. Read advocates for the opposing views. Find out what the best arguments are on the other side. You should know what those on the other side believe about homosexual unions, about evolution, about abortion. And look for the hard situations. For example, there's a very famous thought experiment that a pro-abortionist offers about an individual. She says, imagine that you're an individual, you wake up in the hospital, you have no idea what was going on, and you didn't plan it, but you're hooked up with a bunch of tubes and blood is flowing and things like that, and in the bed next to you, hooked up to the same kind of tubes, is this like world-class violinist. This person who's an amazing artist. And you said, what's going on? I didn't sign up for this. What are you doing? And he says, well, we needed your blood to keep this violinist alive. But don't worry, it's only for a few months. And after 9 months, we'll let you go and you'll be free. The person asks, do you think it's morally appropriate for you to say, no, unhook me, even if the violinist dies? They're drawing an analogy to abortion. How do you answer that? Also, you have things like retroviruses if you're talking evolution. Endogenous retroviruses are a kind of virus that inserts itself into cells, into your cells in your body, that will be passed on to your kids. All viruses insert themselves into your DNA. These viruses insert themselves into your DNA of your germ cells, the ova, the sperm, that will then be propagated to your kids. And these viruses supposedly are these ones that have been shut off, or old viruses that the body no longer has to worry about. And all humans have these broken DNA parts. And they're all inserted at the exact same location, but so do chimps. So do other great apes, have the same viruses in the same location. How do you account for that? These are the tough questions. There's answers out there. Maybe we'll get to them in the Q&A. But I want to finish this first. Don't shy away from the toughest. You don't have to bring up the toughest questions, by the way. I want to clarify this. You don't want to throw the hardest hardball out there. But if they're asking, say, yeah, let's find out. Let's dig in together. Be able to express the viewpoints of those you disagree with honestly. So much so that the people who heard you and held those viewpoints would say, yeah, you got it right. You don't want to create a straw man. But you should teach the opposition and show why we have good answers to that. And lastly, teach Christianity as atmosphere. Ultimately, Christianity touches everyone. Racism doesn't make sense unless all people are created equal, right? Racism is only immoral if all people are created equal. All people are only considered created equal if Christianity's teaching that all men were made in the image of God is true. Take away one, then what's wrong with racism? Just because it makes someone feel bad? Christianity influences and changes everything. If you look over the history of the world, you will see this. The Romans thought it crazy what the Christians did. The Romans, when they had extra kids, they just leave them by the banks of the Tiber. Infanticide was universally practiced among the Greeks, the Romans, the Mesoamericans, those in India. Too many kids? Or maybe a kid with clubbed feet, well, he'll never be a farmhand and we can't really afford the extra food. Dump him. We even have a letter from an ancient Roman whose pregnant wife was about to give birth, and he says, you know, if it's a boy, keep it. If it's a girl, discard it, because I don't want to pay the dowry when she grows up. That was the world before. What Christianity has done is made that unthinkable. It makes the world make sense. And if you show that, if you show Christianity as the fundamental aspect of what drives the very moral fabric of a proper society, then pulling it out is about as crazy as believing a flat earth. So, how do we create a bulletproof faith in a backwards world? Well, it's not all us. There's no way that, or spell or path or incantation that will guarantee 100% accuracy rate. What we can do, though, is to create an environment where we understand Christianity is more than simply what he believes as opposed to what they believe. It is the thing that makes life worth living. Okay, I've given you a ton. Are there questions? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so let's take them one at a time. Unplugging the violinist argument. There's two problems, and this happens all the time. People will bring you an analogy. People will paint you a picture. Violinist hooked up to tubes. Now, you didn't necessarily plan on this. You just woke up and it was there. But now that violinist's life is in your hands. And it's only going to be for 9 months, right? And then it's all over. Well, if it's fine, if it's morally okay for you to separate yourself from the violinist and the violinist dies, then why isn't it morally okay for a woman to separate herself from a child and a child dies? Because the analogy isn't the same. The situations are different. There's nothing that you did ahead of time to cause the violinist to be hooked up to you. There's something that you did to cause yourself to be pregnant. Number one. Number two, being life support for another human individual can be a kindness, and you can choose to do that, but it's outside of your natural bodily functions, right? This is not how our bodies are built. We don't have tubes in order to feed other people our blood. However, childbirth is how our bodies were set to work. That's the primary goal of our reproductive system. What you've been using it for is a secondary goal. What you're saying is we want to kill the child, the primary outcome, the natural course of life that takes place, and only get the secondary good parts. That's completely different than someone intruding upon you and using your body in a way your body was never designed to be used at all. That's the second piece. And lastly, the young child, first of all, the inconvenience is much less than being strapped into a bed. And people try to work with this one. Well, what if the violinist could go around with you everywhere you went? And yeah. You know, they try to wiggle out of it. But there are options for you after those 9 months. There's adoption. If that person that we're talking about is a real person, is biologically your person, then you should take some care with it. Because even though you didn't plan it to happen, it still is a result. Okay? You may have been driving home drunk, hitting an individual, crippling that individual. Now you have to pay that individual restitution for the rest of their lives because they're going to need medical support for the rest of their lives. Your decision, even though it was a one-time decision, still leads to a long-term responsibility. And that's true with birth as much as it's true with other aspects. So the two situations are not identical. There's actually a big difference between the two. On the question of endogenous retroviruses, these ideas that there's these viruses that has come along, so it's a little misleading. You'll hear this kind of stuff. What we're finding out now, and I would say this revolution happened within the last 5 years, is the whole concept of junk DNA. So there's two things that you hear. First of all, well, we're 98% similar to apes in our DNA. You hear that, right? They love to throw that out there. And then, but 80 to 90% of our DNA in our body is actually just leftover stuff from previous evolutionary paradigms, previous evolutionary involvements. Neither one of those things are true. What they found, and especially because gene sequencing, right, DNA tests and things like that are very, very new. They just started in the 1990s. We didn't have the full human genome sequenced until just after the turn of the millennium. It's all very new stuff. And they're finding out that while there are certain genes that code for things. So it's one gene, one part of your DNA codes for brown eyes, one part of your gene codes for your height or your weight. But there's all this other stuff that doesn't directly code for things. But what they found is when they take it out, it breaks down. The system doesn't work. So while this gene maybe codes for brown eyes and you swap it out with another one and it codes for blue eyes, the instruction set for how to build that is in this stuff over here. And what they thought was junk DNA, what they thought were these dead retroviruses, turns out they're important because they give the instructions of how to get to the eye, whether the eye is brown or blue, right? So if you think like a computer code, you know, you have a style sheet that tells you what the page looks like, but you also have the architecture of the page. And you have to have an operating system to make the whole thing come together. And our genome has kind of stuff like that. Some of it is how we're built, some of it is how to build it, and some of it is the system of steps that it takes in order to put the whole thing together. So the idea that we're 98% the same as chimps, that's not true. That's only the coding of those things, and they're actually pulling back to maybe 70, 80%. But it's like, so what? We're 50% the same as a mouse. You know, I mean, what does that prove? That, guess what? If I'm a designer and I find a thing that works, I'm going to use it more than once. It's not just Western houses that have doors. All houses have doors. It doesn't mean that the same designer put all the doors in, or that one door evolved from another. No, it means that the guy said, hey, this works, let's use it again, right? Let's copy it. If it's a mansion, if it's a little house, I started the architectural plans with nothing, but I'm still going to use doors and windows because those things work. The Roman arch, yeah, I can use it to carry water, but I can also use it to build a Colosseum. It works in both cases. It doesn't mean one evolved from the other. It means that an intelligence is saying, let's use that over here. So that's the answer for the retroviruses. Hopefully that'll help you. But stuff like that. We can engage in these kinds of issues. We can engage in these kinds of questions. And what you find when you start to dig is like, wow, there's actually really good answers out there. They sound scary ahead of time, but when you unpack it, oh, okay, that makes sense. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.